we completed the OpenID authorization code flow with Pixie. So there was one thing when we were trying to configure the authorization server, right? So there we have one property called public versus confidential application. So what does that mean? Because that's a very, very important part of the configuration. So in OAuth or OpenID terminology, if you assign public tag to some application, then that means this type of application, the public application, will not need any additional authentication to get the token from the token endpoint. So let's take a look at the flow first. So something like so here you have done everything. You got the authorization code. Then you go to the token endpoint to get the ID and access token, right? In this case, if this application is public, then there will be no additional authentication. Uh, the client can easily exchange the authorization code and get the token, right? But if this application is confidential, then the client will have to prove its identity that it's the correct client and to get the token. This feature is to um, protect the data of the token endpoint so that mm, even if the token is the authorization code is somehow falls into the hand of some, let's say, some man in the middle attack, something like that. In that case also the token is not issued to someone else. So to protect this, we have Pixie flow, and then we also have this feature, public and confidential. For the confidential, client need to do additional authentication in token request as a token endpoint. So here you can see if we choose the confidential application, additional authentication is enabled. So the how we decide if some application is public or confidential, right? So most of the banking application where the user information is really sensitive, like banking or maybe some finance related application, tax, these kinds of sensitive application, there we will use the confidential flow. And what type of authentication, like we already talked about, okay, it's additional authentication, right? But how does the authentication happen? So we have, I think, three or four type of authentication, right? In confidential uh, application type. First is client secret post. So here what happens? Client ID and client secret is sent to the token request. So the flow already completed and the client got the authorization token. Oh, sorry, authorization code. So now it wants to get access token, right? So what this client will do, it will send the request to the token endpoint. But since it is a confidential application, it will have to include its client ID, the client secret, the authorization code, the grant type, in a post request to the token. And so the request will be something like this. The method is post, and the host will be all your authorization server token endpoint. The content type application can be anything. Then you have your client ID, client secret. These are two, mm, two mandatory parameter for client secret post to get the access token from the token endpoint. Okay. Mm, this was post. Now we come to the basic. So in basic, you still have to do the authentication, but this time, instead of sending the parameter like client ID, client secret, which are like very sensitive, the client secret is very sensitive. So, so to fix this problem and make the request more secure, what what the basic method does that it defines certain parameter how the client ID and client secret can be sent. The first thing is we have to do something like this: uh, client ID colon client secret, and then convert this entire string by base 61. Like encode this into base 64 and then send this into the token request. So the request will look like this: same token endpoint, host authorization server. Then you will have authorization basic, and here you will pass the base client ID, client's secret, which are encoded by base 64. So this type of request is still more secure than as compared to the post where you just have to send the client ID and client secret. So anyone can like intercept it or see. Like, then we have client secret JWT. So what is this? So sorry, this is a very secure method of, for the confidential application authentication. So in this method, what you do is like the client, right? Client will have to create some data. Here, data is like a JWT token, and JWT token, and then the client have to sign that JWT with the client secret, right? So, so it creates a JWT with certain information, then sign the JWT token in with the client secret, right? And then it do the request at the token endpoint. The authorization server will check the JWT token and try to decrypt the signature of the token, because the authorization server is the one who issued the client ID and client secret. So let's see, yeah, it sends the request to the token token request from the authorization server. Authorization server verifies the signature. So once that is done, so it will know, okay, the request is coming from the correct client. And there are certain rules how the data, right? Data is like 8 JWT token. In which format the JWT has to be sent to the authorization server, else the request will be not valid. So this will be something like you have to include some mandatory parameter, that is ISS, which will mean the client ID, the issuer of this token, right? And subject to this token is going to be client ID, audience, who is intended for this. token. That will be token endpoint, and JTI, JWT token ID, expression type, and issue instant. So these are few mandatory parameters, and then the client have to encrypt this or sign this token with its client secret and send it to the authorization server. And how the request will look. So in this case, in uh, in the case of JWT, right? So there is one additional parameter which will be called into the request, that is client assertion type. So client assertion type, you have to define what kind of assertion you are sending to the signed assertion. Same like SAML 2.0, right? We generate the IDP will generate the SAML assertion, and you can then sign the assertion. The IDP will sign it and send it to the service provider, and then service provider can verify the signature of assertion and then can consume it, right? The same concept is there. So in the assertion, we are just sending the JWT token in this format, signed with the client secret. So client assertion type JWT error, and client assertion. Here you will send the data of the JWT. So this is the most like better way to secure your application, right? As compared to post. Post is the least. Then we have basic. Then after that we have client secret JWT. And now we have another parameter here, a private key JWT. So this is you can say is similar to how we do the certificate exchange in SAML 2.0, right? We exchange the IDP and SP certificate, and when the flow starts from let's say service provider will sign the authentication request, and IDP will decrypt the authentication request using the private key of service provider, right? And then after authentication of authorization, it will generate the SAML response. So it can sign anything, SAML assertion, right? Name, ID, or attributes, anything with its private key, and will send the data to service provider. Then service provider can decrypt it. So the same concept is used in the private key JWT, right? So how that works? So when you set up the information, right? The information over the certificate, right? The client will have to share the public key, its public key to the authorization server. It can be done with the help of like some metadata URL, right? Where you can just download the certificate, or the simple way would be to extract the certificate and just send it to the authorization server, right? So this is a precondition that needs to be met. And after that, the same thing, the flow is same. So the data is still a JWT token in the same format, and it this time it is going to be signed with the private key instead of uh, the client credential, as in the last flow, right? Here it will be signed with the private key, and then the request will be made at the token endpoint. The parameter is still going to be the same, client assertion. And when the authorization server uh, gets this client assertion right, it will try to uh, decrypt it using the public key of the client. Once that happens, it will validate the data data of the assertion, and then it will know, okay, the request is coming from the same client, and I can send the access to it. Okay, so something like this. Sign it, create a JWT with certain information, then sign it, send it as client assertion at, at the token request, right? And then the authorization server will verify the signature using the public key. So that will be our confidential application flow, like how different type of request in the confidential, right, will work. So we have uh, post, basic, uh, J, client JWT, and then private JWT, private key JWT, and secret JWT. Uh, any doubt on these flows?
No.
Okay, great. Let me just start the lab so we can take a few demo. And so your question was how we can protect the API gateway, right? Something like that. Antaryami,
Yes, correct. That's correct.
how we can protect some
API
API,
gateway
right?
through SiteMinder.
Is there some specific API gateway, or you are talking about or it can be any API
You
gateway,
can give a
right?
ge- you can give a generic view.
Okay. So same like OIDC, right? Some API gateway will have some endpoint where you can exchange the data using some access token, right? Something like that. You have to do the authentication. So it can be done in two ways. First, you can protect it through the secure proxy, right? Agentless configuration. You can protect it with the help of that. Or you can do something like with the client ID and client secret. This flow. You can do that. Okay. So let's take the first flow, how you will protect with the SPS. Right. So you will create one domain here, right? first you will create some agent will be like this, like SPS agent. You will give the name for that. Then in the ACO, then you will use the SPS, right? And then you will pass the default age and name and these kind of properties and logs. So your ACO is created. Same like normal application. But in the auth scheme, right, you will use a basic type of auth scheme, not some HTML auth schemes, something like that, right? So why we are using basic? So in basic, if some call is made at the backend, right, um, via some script or via some application, then it can just pass the credential directly. But in HTML, that is a bit complex, so we'll use a basic authentication scheme there. So when that steps, then you will create the domain, right? Policy, domain. mm, 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 SPA. So same, you will map it to some user directory who want to access, right? And the URL of the application. Uh, let's say this is the API. So this is actually an API. This is the SiteMinder API. F web service CA SSO OIDC. This is the OIDC API. So how we are going to protecting this? We are we are protecting this API with the space IDB auth scheme, right? And here this is the end resource. So in case of API, right, you have to provide these parameters: get, put, post, option, and connect. Right? I think there's one more option to delete also. If you want someone to allow that HTTP method, right? Uh, that you can allow based on any. So once this is done, you will create some policies if you want to allow, how you want to allow access. If you want to control the IP where from where the request is coming, that you can define here. User mapping if you want to assign to some group, and then you can create some rule, something like this, right? This rule, and then you can map it into the policy. Once that is done, your resource is protected, the API endpoint is protected. So whenever a user will try to access that, right, that endpoint, he will be prompted for some authentication. Uh, he has to pass some credential based on the user directory which is configured on the vendor end, right? If the user is present, the authentication and authorization will happen. Then sorry, then SM session token will be generated, right? Once that token is generated, the developer or whoever is trying to interact with the API, right? What it will do, it will store that SM session, and any request you try to make, right? Any request you try to make with the other endpoint of the same API, then he will have to pass the credentials. Sorry, that SM session cookie into the payload. Uh, because of that, the SiteMinder will know, okay, this user, I've already done the authentication and authorization for this user, and this user already has access to this API. So I will allow access to other endpoint of the same API as well. So it will be done based on the SM session cookie. So first you do the configuration part. Uh, protected with the basic authentication scheme. Second, when the user interacts with the API, he has to do the authentication and store that SM session, right? So once the SM session is stored, then he can interact with the API endpoint, and any request you want to make, right? Get, put, post, right? To uh, these requests, he will have to pass the SM session into the request. Otherwise, SiteMinder will just reject the request. Uh, was it clear to you?
Yes.
Okay. So give me few minutes. I want to show you the C flow. Uh, but the server is taking a bit time to start up. Any other doubts and query if you have, so we can cover this today for you. And if you
I don't have any
need,
doubts, just one query I have. So
Mhm.
basically, when we are dealing with the clients, what are the in the run books? What are the details the client needs to put? Basically, we share a run book, right? Whether
Right.
it's a agent-based communication or agentless communications. So in the run book, what are the details the clients need to?
So like depend which, let's say some client comes to you and for the integration of their application, right? If it's uh, first thing is what kind of authentication it will need, right? Whether it's like agent based SAML or OIDC, right? So if it is a agent based, it's straightforward. It's not usually covered in this documentation, mostly in the federation section. So in the federation, the first question will be, right, uh, are you coming like, will you be acting as SP or IDP, right? That's the basic question. If you are coming for the standard protocol. So whether the client will be acting as a SP or IDP, then the entity ID and how we can get the metadata, right? And what are the attribute you will need, right? Based on SP or IDP, what are attribute you will need from us for this single sign-on. That's a technical part of thing, right? And then you can for the security part will be the, like that. Do you need the sign session, sign name ID? These kind of thing will be included in the security part. And for the project management part, it will be like who will be providing support in case of issue, right? Let's say you are acting as a IDP and your client is acting as a SP, and there is a login break happening at that time, and we know we are sending the uh, assertion the in the correct way. So who will be responsible for troubleshooting these that issue from the client end, right? So that will be more like project management part. So you cover all these things. The technical information you need to for the configuration, the security configuration, right? And the project management part, like who will provide support, XYZ, right? Who will do the troubleshooting, these kind of things.
I'm talking about the sessions after that, right? So these
Yeah,
documents.
yeah. This I will share. So it has all the SAML flow, OIDC flow, right? And so you just have to look for uh, look for the key point, and to understand the flow, you can see, okay, this is happening, this is happening, now this is the flow. So this all information I will just need to update something in that. I think federation part is pretty much covered. Maybe, yeah, federation part is covered here. Do you want me to update this web agent flow here, or it's at okay?
It's okay. It's won't be an issue.
Okay. So though I have covered like with the help of diagram, right? How SiteMinder works with the logs, right? So you can take a look at that, and in federation, I will just update what are these, right? I will put the definition here. That should be it. And then we have all the flows that is happening, and the sample flow from our labs. And
Yeah,
then,
sure.
okay. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
will
sure.
send this information after a little bit of update as after our class. Hmm. This server. So uh, Antra, I mean to test the OIDC flow, right? You will need two things. First is the postman, right? If you want to test it out, how that works, right? So I will show you the postman configuration. So here you will have to create some kind of environment, right? Where you will pass the client ID, your client secret, your well-known URL, authorization, endpoint, token, endpoint, all this information, right? That you will have to pass on. Okay, and then you can select port 2.0 from the type, right? And the flow which you want, right? Authorization code, authorization will fix the implicit password credential, client credential, right? So we want to test the fixing. So here, and do you want to choose it with the browser? Okay, then I put the yes, and then you can pass all the endpoints as a environment variable, same scope. State is just some random word, and then you can test this complete pixie flow, or else you will need some kind of a uh, some kind of single page application, web server, OIDC, and the authorization flow which I have configured the help of Apache web server, right? So let me show you the configuration if you just want to use it just sometime. So let's take std conf. To use OpenID with the Apache web server, right? You will have to use this module mod auth OpenIDC, right? This is a module which is required for using uh, OIDC flow with Apache. Same like we have like some module for the web agent, right? We have this module for the OpenID, and the web server should be SSL enabled. You will have to generate some kind of self-signed certificate. So here you can see these parameter. Uh, Metadata provider, it's my well-known URL. Then issuer, my client ID, my client secret, authorization endpoint, token endpoint. These are information I just passed, right? And then my redirect URL. My redirect URL is test.lab example slash redirect. This is what I have configured in my client uh, in, into the OpenID, right? Then we have scope, what we want, client ID, client secret, or I mean, OpenID and email. The method, what method we are going to use, right? How we going to validate the, how we are going to do the validation at the token endpoint, since we are using the Pixie flow here. So you see we have client secret post. So what we discussed earlier in our session, client secret post. Yeah, client secret post. I have to send my client ID and client secret in during the token endpoint. Right, when I try to request the uh, access token, that will be done some cryptographic passphrase and how you want to the payload of the tree, right? And then you can just create some folder named example, mm, protected with valid user and OpenID net. So every time someone try to access this URL, right, the OIDC flow will trigger authentication uh, from the client, the OIDC client. Let's see, federation, OpenID. Then we have clients. the client, the same configuration I've done here. Okay, this is the lab OpenID, my client, authorization provider, SMOIDC scope, OpenID email, authorization code, then this, my redirect URL, right? This thing. Same. So, let's see. Okay, we have 5 more minutes. I don't think I will be able to show you this since server is not up yet, but that's okay. Uh, if you don't have any question or any more doubt, Andrea, we can end today's session, and this will be the end of our SiteMinder training and this updated document in some time.